So I have Andre here, who is a member of the International Socialist Alternative in Brazil. How's it going, Andre?
Yeah, I'm fine. And you?
Good, good. Glad you could make it. So we have been following closely the situation in Bolivia. Historically, the socialist movement has oftentimes looked to Bolivia and the party MAS, which is the movement for socialism. And we had Andre here previously to speak about what was going on there, in regards to the coup. But now we saw a recent electoral victory. So, Andre, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. Toya. Well, only a few days ago, we got the final results of the elections in Bolivia. But since Monday, it was known that the mass victory had been overwhelming. So Luis Arce Catacora and Davi Choquehuanca were elected president and vice president with 55% of the votes, and the MAS obtained a two-thirds majority in the Legislative Assembly, both in the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. In La Paz and Cochabamba, just to give you an example, Luis Arce obtained an incredible 68 and 66% of the votes, respectively. The difference in votes compared to the second place, the right-wing candidate, Carlos Mesa, was over 25%. Concerning the ultra-right-wing candidate, Luis Fernando Camacho, the difference was more than 40%. And what explains this result is the profound popular rejection of the coup d'etat promoted by these sectors of the right wing in 2019, and the catastrophic experience of almost a year of Janine Áñez's illegitimate government in a context of economic and social collapse and the pandemic of the new coronavirus. The 2019 coup took place in a context in which there was some political wear and tear by Evo Morales after 13 years in government. And the right wing and imperialism used the situation to denounce an alleged electoral fraud in the elections. At that time, Evo Morales, the difference between Evo Morales and Carlos Mesa in the elections had been much smaller than now, only 10%. Which is the minimum necessary to avoid a second round. So the right wing did not accept the result, nor did they accept the realization of a second round of voting. So they choose to promote a coup and impose as president Senador Janine Áñez in a totally illegitimate manner. So the coup involved violent action in the streets by the extreme right paramilitary forces, a police riot, an ultimatum from the army command demanding the resignation of Evo Morales, and full support for the coup by the Organization of American States and US imperialism, as well as right-wing governments in the region. So the mass resistance against Janine Áñez and the electoral victory of the mass now shows the strength of the working class and the oppressed people in Bolivia and their struggle against all these reactionary forces. And this message has great strength, not only in Bolivia, but in all of Latin America.
It's so inspiring when the working class can, come together and fight and have a victory. But what does that mean when we say, this is basically because of the working class? Does that just mean that people got together, went out, and collectively voted for the candidate that they wanted?
Well, since the beginning, from the beginning, Janine Áñez's government was marked by a strong authoritarian escalation and intense repression. Dozens were killed in the process of resistance to the coup and to her government. I would like to emphasize here the massacres in Sacaba, in the region of Cochabamba, and Sencata in El Alto, just close to La Paz, promoted by the government and the armed forces. So, as was quite common in the region, Janine Áñez used the pandemic as a justification for further repression and to postpone the electoral process that was originally scheduled for May. In August, faced with another postponement of the elections, a strong movement against the government and for democratic and clean elections exploded. So the Central Obrera Boliviana, the COB, the Bolivian Workers' Center, and the Pact of Unity, various social movements, workers, peasants, and indigenous movements mobilized with massive assemblies, demonstrations, and more than 100 roadblocks throughout the country. So this mobilization was what prevented a new coup d'etat, a coup inside the coup, a coup within the coup. It was the direct struggles of the workers that ensured that the elections, in fact, took place without so much space for frauds and even more anti-democratic maneuvers. But this movement could indeed have gone much further than it was in reality. So in the mobilization in August, for example, the demand for the immediate overthrow of Janine Áñez's government was adopted by broad sectors of the movement, but this demand was not taken up by the COB leadership and was explicitly rejected by Evo Morales and the MAS leadership. So overthrowing Áñez would have been very important to ensure an even more favorable balance of power for radical and profound transformations in Bolivian society. But as they have done many times in the past, the MAS leadership tried to contain the radicality of the process and channel this dissatisfaction into institutional ways and keeping them under control. But there is no doubt that this mass struggle was decisive for this election result.
Yeah, and I mean, what an important lesson for us to kind of analyze. You know, on the one hand, it's so important and great that the working masses in Bolivia were able to defend democracy and make sure that the election happened and there was no fraud. And what that took was mass mobilization. But also we need to be honest with what could have happened if we had pushed the movement further. I think that's a great lesson for us to take in the socialist movement. I want to shift a little bit though, because I mean, over the past few decades, we've seen American imperialism, make its way throughout Central America, throughout South America. This was a defeat on American imperialism by the Bolivian working masses. Do you think that this is the beginning of the end of American imperialism?
Well, it's not the beginning of the end, but it's a very important step forward in the resistance against imperialism in general. You know that US imperialism was a protagonist in planning the 2019 coup and did everything possible to interfere in this year's election. So the US Embassy in La Paz has always been an active center of conspiracy against the democratic rights of the Bolivian people. So as we explained it at the time, the deeper meaning of what happened in Bolivia in 2019 can be seen in the explicit demonstration by Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of Tesla company, when asked on Twitter whether the interest in Bolivian lithium was not behind the coup d'etat, he simply replied, "We will coup whoever we want, so deal with it." So it was explicitly in this message. So, but it is also important to highlight for example, the Brazil's sub-imperialist role also concerning Bolivia, especially under the ultra-right-wing government of Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is a faithful lackey to the interests of US ruling class in Latin America and also serves the Brazilian landowners who controls large areas in eastern Bolivia and help to finance extreme right-wing groups such as the Civic Committee Pro Santa Cruz, etc. So it's true, the defeat of the right and imperialism also makes direct intervention by US imperialism in Venezuela, for example, more difficult. So it's important development in the region. So in general, the defeat of the Bolivian right wing and the extreme right in these elections is also a defeat of imperialism and also Latin American right-wing governments and politicians like Bolsonaro, for example.
I see a beautiful little child back there that wants to say hello. But one last question, and then we'll let you get back to your fatherly duties. What is the effect that we're seeing throughout the entire region, throughout Latin America? And also, what do we need to keep this movement going?
Well, I think the first task for the movement at this moment is to learn the lessons of the last months. So without popular and workers' struggles in the streets, workplaces, without the mobilization of peasants, indigenous people, women, youth, there is no way to advance the conquests. The electoral victory would not have been won without the resistance against Agnes, without the roadblocks, without the struggles in the streets, despite all the difficulties, the repression, and the pandemic. We must also reject any illusion that from now it's enough to wait for the progressive changes through the regular institutional channels, the parliament, the action of the ministers, etc. So in a context of a deep economic and social crisis, and where the pandemic is still a very serious problem, the role of the movement is to conquer, to win the achievements from the struggle, by the struggle. Otherwise, the new government will accommodate and adapt to the limits imposed by the crisis of capitalism, as, for example, we have seen from governments considered progressive, such as Alberto Fernandez in Argentina and López Obrador in Mexico. So Evo Morales recently stated that Bolivia is an example of how to promote progressive changes within capitalism, but that is an illusion. Bolivia cannot count on a new commodity boom cycle to promote some income redistribution. And we are in the middle of a global crisis of capitalism. And the only way to secure gains for the working people is to break with the logic of that system. So the workers' movement needs to take this perspective and this anti-capitalist and socialist program, even if the government does not have it independently of the new government. So Luis Arce Catacora, the new president, has made statements in defense of a reconciliation and national unity. But it's not possible to have a reconciliation and unity with the murderers of workers in Sacaba and Sencata, with who has gained millions of dollars through corruption in the purchase of health equipments during the pandemic, or with who has promoted a coup d'etat to guarantee the profits of the multinationals and landowners, etc. So the fascists and proto-fascists in Bolivia and those who support them must pay for their crimes. If they are not punished, they will repeat their crimes in the future. So it is the role of the social movements to maintain a permanent mobilization for their demands and to conquer them with struggle, advancing in an anti-capitalist and socialist alternative. So this is the way for the workers in Latin America and in general as a whole. For example, you know that today, Sunday, the Chilean people are voting in the plebiscite on the new constituent process. But they are still fighting in the street for freedom for the political prisoners of the popular uprising of 1 year ago, for the right to a public pension system, for the right to public education, for women's rights, for the rights of the Mapuche people. And also in Colombia, in the same way, the struggles are advancing. We have the protest against the police violence. And also this week, we have seen the indigenous mobilizations in Bogota and other popular demonstrations. So the results of the Bolivian elections help to stimulate these struggles and influence other electoral processes in several other countries. And we are entering a time of intense social and political polarization in Latin America, and the process in Bolivia are part of that. They show that it's possible to defeat the right wing in the streets and at the ballot boxes, but it's necessary to go to the ultimate consequences and defeat capitalism and build an international socialist alternative.
Thank you so much. And it's so true. You know, the work that they've done is inspiring and all throughout Latin America. And hopefully in Brazil, you know, that work is being inspired there as well. You have 2 campaigns that you guys are running, one in Sao Paulo, where you are. So good luck. And we will be sure to have you back on the show to talk about the results of that campaign. Thanks so much, Andre.